Random House Audio presents The World is Bigger Now, an American journalist release from captivity in North Korea, a remarkable story of faith, family, and forgiveness, by Euna Lee with Lisa Dickey, read for you by Janet Song. Note to the listener: the names and identifying details of some individuals and locations in this book have been changed to protect their identities. Quoted dialogue in the book is based on the author's recollections. Chapter 1: Our Lives Before and a Story That Mattered. At around 5 a.m. on March 17, 2009, the sun had not yet risen over the Tumen River in northeast China. The morning was absolutely still. The only sound I could hear was the rustling of foliage under my feet as I made my way toward the riverbank. I had overslept that morning, so we were running late. We'd have to hurry to get the footage we needed before the sun rose. The Tumen River formed the border between North Korea and China, and it wasn't safe to film there in the daylight when we might be seen. I had come to the river with my current TV colleagues, Laura Ling and Mitch Koss, as well as a local guide. We'd parked a short distance away, and as we walked from the car to the river's edge, I was already shooting footage for our planned documentary about North Korean defectors. In my viewfinder, with the aid of night vision, I could see Laura and Mitch's feet as they walked across the dry, tangled brush. No one else was around when we arrived at the river. It was about 60 yards wide, pale blue with ice all the way across, with only brown branches of trees and brush on each side. The still winter air painfully chilled our ears as we looked out over the ice. This could have been any river outside of any town, except that the other side of the water was North Korea. With its long stretches of uninhabited riverbank, the Tumen was a natural place for North Korean defectors to cross over in search of a better life. Years of famine in North Korea and the oppressive political situation there had led hundreds of thousands of people to try to flee the country, and many of them crossed in places just like the one where we now stood. As part of our planned documentary about these defectors, we wanted to show this important route of escape. Mitch and I would do the filming, and Laura would be in front of the camera doing the reporting. Our guide, a man in his 30s who had worked with the Underground Railroad Support Network for Defectors, would point out landmarks and suggest places to film. Just as the sun began to peek over the horizon, our guide, wearing a Chinese police coat he had borrowed from a friend, walked onto the translucent ice. It was absolutely quiet, and I couldn't see movement of any kind on the other side of the river. It was also freezing. Stepping onto the ice, I couldn't help but think how cold and frightened anyone trying to cross from the North Korean side would be. As we followed the guide toward the middle of the river, Mitch said, "Be careful, I hear ice cracking." Mitch was heavier than Laura or me, and he seemed nervous. I was nervous too, but I was mostly focused on getting the best footage we could. We had very limited time in China and South Korea, so we had all been working incredibly hard to get all the material we needed for the documentary. Walking on the ice made me nervous, but I figured the guide must know whether it was safe or not. I trusted him. When we got close to the middle of the river, the guide suddenly began making a low hooting sound. It was a signal of some kind, but for whom? We assumed he must be communicating with the North Korean border guards he knew. We'd heard that some North Korean guards were in contact with people in China, and some had supposedly even spoken to foreign journalists who crossed this same river in search of interviews. We were definitely alert, but not fearful. Not yet. The guide continued to make hooting sounds, but there was no response from the other side, so he kept going. We followed him, and when we neared the middle of the river, I filmed Laura doing a stand-up, a monologue in which she spoke directly into the camera, describing where we were and how defectors crossed the river. I then shot footage of her walking on the ice as I followed from behind. We shot another stand-up so Laura could describe how close the two countries were. But when I paused to show her the digital footage, we realized the shot didn't really show how narrow the river was. "Wait here," I said to Laura. I'll go back and get a wide shot of you standing on the ice." But as I started walking back toward the Chinese riverbank, the guide told me to stop. "Don't go back there," he said. "The ice is thin. It might break." The ice didn't seem any thinner there, but the guide insisted, and I didn't have time to argue. The sun was coming up, and we needed to move fast. So, reluctantly, I walked back to the middle of the river to rejoin the others. At that point, the guide motioned for us to follow him past the midpoint of the river, and as we crossed into North Korean territory, my heart began to pound. I knew this was a risky move, but I was so intent on getting the story out, I didn't focus on the potential danger. So, at the guide's urging, we followed him farther, all the way to the North Korean riverbank. He pointed to a small village that looked like it was frozen in time, a collection of 5 or 6 huts with thatched roofs. "There," he whispered, pointing. I zoomed in to where he was pointing, and as I filmed, I knew we were glimpsing an important part of the Underground Railroad by which thousands of North Koreans have been smuggled into China. This was what we had traveled so far to find, the true story of people putting their lives on the line in a desperate quest for freedom. I felt exhilarated at the sight. But it was also frightening to be on North Korean soil, so I was relieved when, after only a minute or so, we started back toward the Chinese side. The air was still, and everything was quiet, until Mitch's voice suddenly pierced the air. "Run!" he shouted. "Run! Soldiers!" Startled, I turned to see 2 North Korean soldiers wearing green military uniforms and holding rifles, sprinting toward us. Laura, Mitch, the guide, and I all ran toward the Chinese riverbank as fast as we could. I was terrified, running in boots that were too big for me across the slippery ice. It wasn't so much that I was afraid the soldiers would capture me. I was more afraid they would shoot us. A thought flashed into my mind. If they shoot, maybe the bullets will lodge in my backpack. Please don't let them shoot my head. Subconsciously, I braced myself for the impact as I ran. Incredibly, the guide looked over his shoulder and yelled at me, "Are you filming this?" Even more incredibly, after first thinking, "Is he crazy?" I actually pushed the record button and continued to run with the camera pointed back under my arm. Even though I was afraid for my life, I was obsessed with getting good material for the documentary. Mitch, who was an avid runner and very fast, reached the shore first and disappeared into the bushes. Laura and I also managed to reach Chinese soil, and when we made it to a gravel path by the riverbank, I thought we were safe. Then I saw, just ahead of me, that Laura had fallen. She was on her knees, looking stunned. "Laura," I shouted, "are you okay?" Her answer sent a chill through me. "I can't feel my leg." Seeing that the 2 soldiers were still coming, the guide reached for my arm. Let's go, he shouted. "Run!" He yanked me off balance, and I fell too. Now the soldiers were just steps away, and I looked down at my camera. I thought, I have to get rid of this. I knew that when the soldiers saw it, they would realize we had been filming. But there was no time. In an instant, the soldiers had seized us. Everything happened in a flash. "Give them money!" the guide barked at me. In a daze, I reached into my pocket and took out what I had. 200 Chinese yuan, about $30. But when I handed it to one of the soldiers, he threw it down in disgust. Okay, let's talk about this," said the guide, addressing the soldiers in Korean. "Let's all calm down." "We can talk on our side," one of the soldiers shot back. The guide began to argue with them, then said, "Just take me, let the others go." But the soldiers refused, and when the guide realized he couldn't talk them out of arresting us, he suddenly took off running. One of the soldiers sprinted after him, leaving the other to guard Laura and me. Mitch was nowhere in sight. The soldier who stayed with us put down his rifle and began to gather our things. "We should grab the gun," Laura whispered. I considered it for a moment, but realized I wouldn't know how to use it even if I could get to it. I also considered running, But even if I could outrun this one soldier, Laura couldn't.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?